What's going on, everybody? Sean from LUMIX Live here, and welcome to this week's recorded session while we are at NAB 2023. I wanted to take some time this week and actually cover the real-time LUT feature, the My LUT file, the LUT library functionality on the S5 Mark II, and clear up some, what I would consider would be maybe some misinformation out there as to how this system works and how you can apply it for both photography and videography. Now, we're going to be focusing primarily on the photography side for this week's stream. We will be coming back and doing a video-oriented one with particularly focusing on the use case of Vlog vGamut in the future, but knowing that there are misconceptions with how the system works when it comes to photography and using the different color profiles, I figured this was probably the best place to start with it to get you the information you need so that you can start playing around with this. Now, we'll be covering everything from taking a raw still image out of the S5 Mark II, bringing it into Adobe Camera Raw through Photoshop, editing that file, creating the LUT, where to save it, how to name it, what the parameters are for it, and then we'll be taking a look at my S5 Mark II and covering how to load it on there, how to create these different looks with the different base color profiles that you have available to you, and then just kind of making sure that you understand some of the different pitfalls that you want to be aware of when trying to work with this from a photography side. So with that, let's jump into my Photoshop and let's start editing a photo and showing you how real-time LUT and LUT library works. All right, so we are here in Adobe Camera Raw, so I'm within Photoshop to kind of walk through how to set up an image for exporting out a look or a lookup table or LUT for the photography-based use in the S5 Mark II platform. So this will be applicable to the S5 Mark II X as well. Now to start with, as I said, a little bit of clarity. There is a difference between working with vlog files and regular kind of standard still files when it comes to creating looks. As a total base here, standard RAW files are in the S5 Mark II, they're 14-bit RAW files. Vlog files are going to be 10 to 12-bit, and it's going to vary because your color space is different. They're not in 709 when you think of video spec. But in the photography side, you're also looking at sRGB versus Adobe RGB, which is, in some cases, can be more color, less color, things like that. So we're looking in the photography sense. At a later date, we will cover the vlog process of creating this, but I want to have someone who's much more skilled in the video side cover that particular topic on its own. So, as I said, I've got a standard RAW file here. This is S5 Mark II. This is shot with a 35mm f1.8. I've got it at 640 ISO, and it's just of a simple color checker. So one of the first things I recommend you doing with this, especially if you're going to work with a RAW file, is do a couple of basic things first before you actually bring this into Photoshop to start working on it, because it'll make sense in a few minutes why you want to not necessarily do everything on the Adobe Camera Raw setup in this particular environment. So the first thing I do is I just come in and I make sure my white balance is set, good to go. I make sure to also look here and pick the color profile that I want to apply this to in the camera. So say, even though I shot this in camera standard, say I actually want to be creating a profile based on the use of, say, Cinelike D2. Now you see you get a very different looking image than you had in standard, but it's one of the nice things with Adobe Camera Raw. I can come in and change which, color profile is used as the base for any of my edits here. You will notice that flat is available, so you can select flat and work there if you want something that's a little bit closer to Vlog, but in a different color gamut or color space. So for this demonstration, I'm just going to actually use the Cinelike D2 as the kind of base for the image here. Now, outside of that, do not adjust anything on this panel here for creating this particular look. Just go in and select Open. Now, as you see here, we've got the image opened. It looks, not necessarily that great. It's not really how maybe I want the image to look. But you've got a couple different things that you can do here If you've already got a way that you typically edit your photos and you like the way that kind of works, you can always go in and use the action tools. So these would be the macro options, things that, if you already have a workflow and you say, hey, I always want to apply X, Y, and Z to my images, and if I do it in Photoshop, it makes it pretty easy to kind of work with. So I've got a couple of them here. We've talked about these before, this cyberpunk look. If you are working with actions, one of the coolest things about this is that it's all done in layers, which is what you are going to need to be able to export a LUT from Photoshop. Again, that's why you don't want to do the raw processing of curves and stuff like that in the Adobe Camera Raw dialog that comes up initially, because it doesn't show up as a layer here down in the actual file. So if I were to just click here and run this, see, it's going to run the process that I had set up. It's a really ridiculous edit, so this is just for, demonstration purposes. But you'll see that it layered out each of these different kind of looks that I wanted. Now, a couple things to kind of keep in mind. Certain effects won't really translate well over in for real-time LUT on the camera. One of those being something like an overall sharpness layer where you're adding in, kind of a lot of extra punchy details. So typically, if I'm going to be loading this onto my camera, I will remove that one and then just kind of leave it as it is here. So this whole look here, once you've got the whole thing set up, say this is how I want this look to go, and I'm ready to, kind of set this up as my look, all I'm going to do is I'm going to go up into the edit, actually the file option. I'm going to go down to export, and then you'll see color lookup tables. So this is saying now, like, hey, I want to export this look onto, the card or whatever it is that I'm going to load onto the camera. So for here, I'm going to click color lookup table. You'll see it's going to give you a couple of different options. You're going to have the description of the file. So here, let's just call this cyberpunk. Copyright, you can fill this in however you want. And then two main things to make sure you select here. You want to make sure that grid points are set to 33 and that your format is cube, because that's the type of file that we're going to load onto the camera. Once you've got that set up, you're just going to click OK, and this is going to open up a dialog box here. Now, because I'm working right off of my memory card here, you'll see that already it's right into the DCIM file, but that's not where you want to save this look. You want to save this on the top level. So once you first click into the card, you'll see DCIM. You might see private if you have saved camera setting files, so on and so forth. So right from here, this is where you name it. Now, we've said this before, but you want to be pretty aware of this depending on the cards that you use, because for a while I've used like really cheap, like 2 GB cards that I've had, which are SDHC cards, just for moving LUTs back and forth. If you are going to load this look onto your camera, do not use SDHC media cards. Use SDXC. And the reason for it is actually quite simple. SDHC limits how long of a file name you can have, and it means that you're more likely going to have to use a .vlt conversion for this versus being able to just take a cube file and put it onto the camera. With the SDXC cards, you can run up to 255 characters, including the extension. So you can actually get much better at this as far as the naming goes. So here, I'm going to change this. Let's just change this Cyberpunk 1. And you'll notice, again, I'm saving this in the root file of the SD card. So we've got DCIM private, Cyberpunk 1, click save. That runs the dialog, and it saves out the LUT file. So now, if I come in here, and I go in, and I actually look at that particular image here, you'll see I have cyberpunk_1.cube. It's 948 kilobytes. Cool. That file is now saved on the camera. But say I don't want to use this particular look. I want to, kind of make my own kind of maybe more standard look that actually kind of, is maybe a little more useful in the real world. So for here is where you're going to actually just be working with layers, your adjustment layers for the imagery. So you've got a couple different ways to do this. You can come in to layer, new adjustment layer, and add each of these different kind of variants that you want. So say I want to come in and I want to actually adjust the curves. So we'll just change this to curves. Say I want to come in and just kind of like, punch it up a little bit. I want to take what is a relatively, kind of neutral-ish color profile, and we're just going to really make it not what it was designed for. So I can come in, change the different curves here. You do also have the ability that, since I am looking at a color checker here, I can also come in and say, oh, pick the different, points and stuff. I'm not going to do that for this because I don't have a true, black point on there. But I can come in and say, okay, where's my highlight? My brightest white reflective point is going to be up here. So if I click that, now you see that it's going to protect that highlight, but we're not going to do that. So then next I can come in and let's add a couple different, kind of looks onto this. Let's add a photo filter to it. So say I want to add a cooling filter, give it a little bit cooler of a look. I want to shift the density down a little bit. Maybe I don't want it as aggressive. Say I want this down at, say, 10. Just give it a little bit of a different look here. Then let's come in and say I want to add... let us do some... Let's do some hue and saturation. So say, I want to come in here and say just set this up to old style. Or strong saturation. Yeah, all right. So say I want to just completely, wreck these colors. I want to go ultra red here and ultra, it just massively shifts the way all this image looks. So, I mean, if we look before to look after, you're really starting, you're clipping colors at this point. So say, all right, cool. This is the look. It's ready to go. I want to, kind of work with this one. You just do the same process. You go to File, Export, you do Color Lookup Table. We'll change this to Viber. Same things there. Go back into here, and we'll do Viber. So again, that is now saved out that look that I was going for, and again, saved it right here. Saved it as a .cube file. Again, it's about the same size. These shouldn't be that big. They should be roughly around the same size for the file that you want to work with. So once that part of it is done, you're then going to now take the card and you're going to put it into your camera because you've saved those. In this case, the way I went through the demonstration, you saved the files right onto the memory card to be able to load them right onto the camera. So let's jump over to my S5 Mark II. And we'll go through actually how you add these in, where to look for them, and how they actually interact with the camera. All right, so now we're looking at my S5 Mark II, and I've got the camera hooked up over HDMI, so we can actually kind of go through this. Now, the original file that I took, as I had said when we were looking at the demonstration, was that, I captured this original file in standard color profile. But the looks that I created were based off Cinelike D2. So you don't have to load the LUTs with those profiles set by default because of how we're going to be using them. So all you have to do initially is just put the card in the camera, go into the menus you can see here, and we're going to go under the cog menu. So this is custom settings. Now on image quality page 1, you'll see the option for LUT library. So we'll click on LUT library, and you'll see I have a bunch of them already loaded in here. What's cool is these are actual ones that are created by YouTuber Ted Forbes, so definitely hit him up for this kind of stuff. I kind of worked on trying to play around with them in the camera here, but I'm going to go into set 8 because that's an empty profile slot for me. So if I now click set 8, go to load, card slot 1, because that's where I've loaded these files onto, you'll see the two that we had just created in the Photoshop program. So let's take Cyberpunk 1. Now it'll say reading LUT file complete. If it does not say reading LUT file complete, That means that you may have a naming issue or you may have just an export issue. Make sure to double check at the previous section of this video to make sure that things like 33 point are selected, that it's .cube, that you're using a SDXC card if it's a .cube file, so on and so forth. Just make sure to check those different things. The case for the extension, as far as capital.cube or lowercase .cube, shouldn't matter. You're able to load these in either way. But make sure you're using the right card and it's the right precision for the LUT. Now I'm also, at the same time, I'm going to go to set 9, go to load, slot 1 again, and I'm going to add in the Viber one that I created. Alright, so now both of these are added into the camera. That means that they are now stored in the camera's memory. You don't have to leave these on the card themselves. You can take them off the cards now if you don't want to have them there. They get stored in the camera's memory, and they would only ever disappear if you reset the camera settings. So they are stored here. So now, how do you actually use these? How do you actually, apply them to a particular look? Well, we're going to go into the camera menu again, and we're going to go up into the photo settings here. So this is the main camera settings for image capture. And for here, you'll see that I'm going to go up to photo styles, and I'm going to click in. And this brings me into the standard option here where I can go through and select each of the standard color profiles. L monochrome, Cinelike D2, things like that. And if you remember, we based the image off Cinelike D2 as the particular look that we went with. So for this, you're not going to select Cine D2 because you're only able to select certain different kind of settings of this image in here. I'm going to actually scroll all the way over, and I'm going to go into the My Photo Style options here. And you'll see that I have My Photo Style 8 is an open option. You can program up to 10 of them in the camera. 4 are available by default. The additional ones you have to just go into the menu and enable, and I'll show you that in a little bit too. So we're going to start on My Photo Style 8. We're going to come to the base photo style for this image. So now I'm going to scroll over to Cinelike D2 because that's the base that I created the look on. Then we're going to continue to scroll down, and you'll see a couple of different options here. You can set your ISO range based on the color profile. Since I shot this image at 640 ISO, I'm actually going to come in and set my ISO for this to 640 because that's what I shot and edited as. You don't have to do this, but this is just a way that I typically like to keep myself in check for how I created these looks. Then you can go into white balance. You can set this to automatically go to a particular white balance. Since I captured the image using auto white balance cool, I'm going to set this to auto white balance cool as the default white balance for this profile. Then I'm going to come down here to see LUT. Now, right now you'll see that it's off, and I can press the AF mode selection button to select a LUT. Now here, I'm going to scroll down, and let's grab the Cyberpunk 1. Now you see that that look that we created on the computer is now applied onto this particular camera. Now, something to note with this is you still have control over contrast and curves and everything that you would normally have if you still want to tweak this further in camera. But you do also still have the ability to come in and change what that base profile is. So I can come in and say, like, if I selected standard, you'll see that it's really punchy, really contrasty. You don't really have a lot of shadow detail with this particular color profile and the LUT that I've applied on it. But if I go back into Cine D2, you'll see that that area above the X-Rite logo is a little bit more open. There's a little more detail. The shadow region has more detail. Because again, this profile was designed based on Cinelike D2, not on standard. So keep that in mind with the profiles that you design. What is the base profile that they are built for? So now, once I'm all set and ready to go, say, all right, I've got this whole setup how I want it. You now have the option to click the display button and then edit the title of this particular photo style. So for here, I'm going to come in and we're going to delete this original name, which is just the default My Photo Style, and I'm going to call this Cyberpunk now. Okay, so we've now named this just Cyber, something simple. I know what it is. I know what the look's going to be when I go for it. So now all you do is you click Set, and then Save Current Settings. And I want to save this under my 8. Overwrite, click Yes, and now my 8 is set as Cyber for the look. When I half press the shutter, you'll see that I go back to shooting the normal, kind of screen here. You'll see that my ISO is set to 640, my white balance is automatically set to auto white balance cool, and I have LUT 8 applied. Now, if I come in and use the quick menu option here, you'll see that I can change these into, Elite Chrome, 1970s, 30s, Pro, all these different kind of modes. I can even go into my 9, which is not set up at all. And right now you'll see auto white balance is set to auto ISO. Our ISO is set to auto ISO. White balance is set to just auto white balance. And I have auto white balance lock set. So, it's a pretty simple basic setup here. And it already chose 6400 ISO for this particular look. But if I come in and change this back to my 8, which is the Cyber photo style, you'll see it's 640 ISO. It's set for LUT 8 and auto white balance cool is selected. Couple other little things to look at here, and we'll do this one more time. We'll go into photo style, we'll go to 9. Let's change this back to Cine D2, and then let's add that vibrant one that we created. And again, I'm going to set this to 640 because that's what I created the look under. We'll set this to auto white balance cool again. We'll go LUT select. Come down to Viber, and you see you get those like vibrant popping colors again where your reds are most definitely clipping because of the edit that I created here. We'll go through the display setting again. We'll change title, and we'll delete this. And then we'll save this out. Save current settings, and we'll want this on my 9. Overwrite. Cool. So now both of those profiles are set and you're ready to go. It's got your look applied to it. So something cool that you can tell whether or not a My Photo Style that you've selected has a LUT applied to it is in the top left where your color profile selector is, it'll say LUT 9. So you can see that next to Auto White Balance Custom. But if I come in and say I change this to 10, which is just the basic My Photo Style, it says My 10. What that's indicating to you is that there is no LUT applied to this. It is just a My Photo Style. It is a basic setup for how you wanted to customize that particular look. If I go back in and we change this back to, say, the Cyberpunk look, you'll see again it says LUT 8. So this becomes a really simple way to just apply and create your different looks for how you want the camera to function. So with the way the camera can work with these different LUTs, there's a couple things to remember about this. At the beginning, I had stated about how this is being shot with standard color profiles for raw stills capture. And I want to make that ultra clear for everyone that wants to try to play around with LUT files or looks in your camera. You have the option, of course, to shoot in real-time LUT, and we don't limit you in being able to shoot raw stills or JPEGs with the Vlog V-Gamut color profile. However, there's something major to note about that. If you're someone who knows that you may want to be editing the raw files later, so bringing them into Photoshop and actually editing this look and creating, maybe a more dynamic edit out of it, because maybe your shadows aren't 100% the way you want them when you shoot it in camera. If you do this with Vlog, you're going to have such a wildly different image than you had created with the LUT file applied. What that means is that while it may look fine in camera, it may be the look that you want, the process to get that file to look the way you want it on the PC or Mac side when you're actually in raw editing software is infinitely harder, and in some cases might not really be possible to get it back to the exact look that you wanted. Because Vlog and V-Gamut are designed for video use cases, and they're not designed for raw still image capture, you do put yourself in a bit of a challenging position. Now, if you're using standard photo profiles like we just showed, Cine D2, V2, standard, so on and so forth, you always still have that initial base that you created the look on. So that means that the edits that I did on the computer to create the look are going to be the same. So if I capture that raw file, and the JPEG looks okay, but maybe I want a little bit more shadow boost to it. Instead of being stuck with just editing that JPEG file, I can take the raw file back into Photoshop, edit the raw file the way I normally would, and then apply the look that I've created onto that actual image. Now, the cool thing too is that Photoshop does have a really cool ability to actually apply a lookup table to your image. So you don't necessarily have to remember, okay, what percentage of curves did I create? You don't have to necessarily remember to set up actions or to create macros for your edits if that's not really what you normally want to do. But you have the ability to create these looks, save them out as .cube files, and then when you load your file into Lightroom and you make your basic edits, you can then apply a lookup table in Photoshop. I think I said Lightroom before, but this is all in Photoshop. You can then apply that lookup table to the image that you've edited and then still have that full flexibility of the image. So I hope this was a useful set of tools for you to work with when it comes to real-time LUT and being able to use LUTs in the My Photo style. There is so much more to talk about when it comes to the video side, and as I said, we will talk about how to create LUTs from a video side perspective with a guest who's much more kind of experienced in the video side and editing and exporting. So be sure to keep an eye out, get yourself registered, subscribe to the channel, like the video if you think you learned something here, share it to those that you may think would find interest in how to do this. And yeah, we'll see you on next week's recorded LUMIX Live as well. So take care, everybody.